Today you join me on something a little bit different. We're at a lovely little remote lake. This lake contains a few good species, but we're after tench. Now tench and spring go hand in hand, and anyone that's fished for them knows that this is the perfect time of year. I did actually go well prepared for this session with 3 rods, but a change in circumstances meant I was only able to use one, so a small travel rod and a small Shimano reel was all I was using. I'd positioned myself in a nice little opening, and once I'd found nature's bank stick, I was ready to go. I'd put a few balls of ground bait out, which was mostly breadcrumb, but had some dynamite green swim stim mixed in. Inside the mix was hemp and some small pellets. As far as hook bait goes, I was using maggots and had a free running Drennan maggot feeder on the line with about 6 or 7 inches hook length down to a size 16 micro barbed hook. Whilst continuing to set my swim up, I fired out maggots about 10 or 15 yards out. I was only fishing the margins. I only took my shoulder travel bag with me, which contains most of the essentials, a few extra feeders, hook link material, scales, all the necessary bits for a short session. Within about an hour I'd started to receive some really positive takes, but surprisingly I wasn't hooking these fish. Wanting to fish as fine as I could get away with, I was using my favourite river hooks, the micro barbed size 16s. One little tip that I like to do once I've tied any hook is to give it a few sharp pulls just to mimic what happens during a fight. Now here I used my bag clasp, but more often than not I just use a zip. If you have a look at almost any zip, it contains a perfect small hole for you to just tighten any hook knot. I continued to get decent bites, and having made a few small tweaks, I started to connect with fish. As I carefully played my first fish in, I was glad to see a nice tench roll just under the rod tip. The bites continued to come, tench after tench after tench, some almost pulling the rod in and others barely even registering on the rod tip. Waiting for that rod tip to pull round can be such an enjoyable method. Sometimes you're just looking for that sign of fish in the area as their tails brush along the line whilst they're feeding in the area. As I carefully played another good fish which tried to get down into the snags to my right, I slowly eased it towards the waiting net. It's hard not to admire the deep dark green, brown and golden colours of these tench. As the session wore on, the tench showed no signs of slowing down and the bites continued to get even more positive. Another of these lovely dark tench, making one more bid for freedom. One thing I noticed during the session was that I was getting a few knocks on the rod tip, but it wasn't registering bites, and I was bringing the feeder in with the hook link wrapped around itself. To stop this happening and to try and make the bites a little bit more positive, instead of using a free running maggot feeder, I tied up a helicopter rig. As you'll see, this is a short rig that sits further up the line and should never tangle. One other tactic that I like to employ is to cut a PVA foam nugget in half lengthways and stuff it in the end of the feeder holes. You can then put the hook into this foam nugget and it should essentially never tangle, being held tight against itself. Here I've got corn on the hook, but you can use any bait, maggot, worms, pellet, boilies, and just making these small changes can help you land some lovely fish like this.